someone hurt you so deeply you couldn't sleep for nights. And then one day, they text you, "Hey, it's been a while. Hope you're doing okay." No apology, no acknowledgement, just casual normalcy. And suddenly, you're the one questioning reality. Did I overreact? Did I imagine the whole thing? Let's get something clear. They didn't forget. They're not confused. They remember exactly what they did, but they choose to act like it never happened. Why? Because owning their actions would mean facing a version of themselves they don't want to see. We live in a world where many want connection without consequences, love without accountability. So when they hurt you, they don't lean in, they vanish. And their silence, it's not innocent. It's a strategy, a calculated move dressed up as indifference. In this video, you'll uncover the real reason people hurt you and then act like nothing happened. More importantly, you'll learn how to protect your peace of mind, emotional boundaries, and self-worth without needing closure from people who were never planning to take responsibility. This isn't just your story. It's a universal lesson for anyone who's ever been hurt and then ignored. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. They remember exactly what they did, but they pretend they don't. They didn't forget. They remember the exact moment they crossed that line, the words they said, the look in your eyes, the way your energy shifted. They remember it all. They just don't want to face it, because facing it means taking responsibility. And for some people, accountability feels more threatening than the damage they caused. Let's get this straight. No one accidentally forgets the moment they shattered another person. People don't move on from causing pain. They bury it. They suppress it. Not because they're confused, but because remembering would force them to change. And change is uncomfortable. Change means confronting guilt. Change means letting go of ego. And for some, comfort will always be more important than conscience. They pretend it didn't happen because that version of the story makes them feel better. It's easier to revise history than to admit, yes, I caused harm, and I never did anything to repair it. The mind plays tricks when it's trying to protect a fragile ego. Instead of acknowledging the damage, it rewrites the timeline. It reframes the conflict. It turns you, the one in pain, into the overreactor, so now you're left questioning yourself. While they're out there pretending nothing ever cracked, here's the brutal truth. Most people aren't taught how to process guilt. They weren't modeled what it means to sit with remorse or to offer repair. So instead, they run. They disappear. They crack a joke and change the subject. They send a meme and pretend you never cried. This isn't because they're unaware. It's because they lack emotional maturity, the kind of depth that allows a person to say, I hurt someone I cared about. I need to own that. That level of inner honesty, it takes strength. It takes discipline of the mind and heart. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real. And real is something a lot of people don't know how to be. You know who does? The Stoics. The ancient Stoics taught that no man is free if he is a slave to his own ego. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters." But here's the other side of that coin. How someone responds after they've caused harm reveals who they truly are. Pretending like nothing happened isn't neutral. It's not passive. It's a choice. And that choice speaks volumes about their character and their limits. Let's bring this down to earth for a moment. You ever have someone betray you? Maybe a close friend, and then a month later, they send you a casual "hey, just checking" in text. No mention of what they did, no apology, just casual small talk. You freeze, because part of you is still carrying the weight of what happened, still wondering if it was your fault, still hoping maybe they'd circle back and say something real. But they don't. Why? Because to acknowledge your pain would mean admitting they were the one who caused it. And for people who build their identity on being good, that's unbearable. So they act like everything's fine, hoping you'll play along. That's not forgetfulness. That's a performance. And the longer you stay silent, the longer the illusion survives. But here's what you must understand. You're not the crazy one. You're not too emotional. You're not asking for too much just because you want basic acknowledgement. You're asking for human decency from someone who's too emotionally limited to give it. And that says everything about them and nothing about your worth. So stop waiting for the text that never comes. Stop rehearsing the conversation they're never mature enough to have. They know what they did. They just don't want to own it. Because if they did, they'd have to feel it. And that's the one thing they've spent their whole life avoiding. Now ask yourself this: are you willing to carry the weight of their denial just to keep the peace? Or are you ready to reclaim your power by no longer needing them to validate what you already know? They remember. They just don't want to admit it. And you don't need their permission to heal. Chapter 2, they don't want to face the truth, because that truth exposes who they really are. People aren't afraid of what they did. They're afraid of what it says about them, because once they admit the truth, that they lied, that they betrayed you, that they walked away while you were bleeding, they have to confront a terrifying possibility. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Maybe I'm not the good person I pretend to be. That's the mirror they can't look into. That's the truth they can't handle. See, most people walk around clinging to a self-image they've carefully curated. I'm a good friend. I'm loyal. I'm honest. But when reality starts contradicting that identity, they panic. And instead of growing, they deflect. They rewrite the story to survive. Because to admit they were the villain, even for a moment, would shatter the fragile narrative that keeps them comfortable. Here's what most people don't understand. Accountability isn't just about saying "I'm sorry." It's about holding space for the discomfort that comes with that admission. It requires emotional intelligence. It requires spiritual discipline. It requires enough courage to sit with guilt without running from it. And let's be honest, a lot of people were never taught how to sit still with guilt. They were taught to explain it away, to blame circumstances, to label the other person too sensitive, to turn truth into drama, and pain into overreaction, because that way, they don't have to change. You do, and it works if you let it. If you start internalizing their deflection, if you start saying, "Maybe I was too intense. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I'm just hard to love." But no, you were just asking for honesty in a world addicted to avoidance. And that's the root of the problem. People will do anything to avoid seeing themselves clearly, because once they do, they can't unsee it. The Stoics understood this inner conflict. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change, for it is the truth I seek. Not the illusion of pride, but modern minds, we don't seek truth. We seek comfort, and truth without pride feels like death to the ego. That's why they avoid you. That's why they disappear. Not because they don't know they hurt you, but because they can't afford to feel what they caused. Because if they feel it, they'd have to change. And change is terrifying. Let's ground this in something real. Maybe you've experienced this. You confront someone calmly, respectfully about how their actions affected you. And instead of listening, they shut down. They make a joke. They walk away. Or worse, they accuse you of being negative or too much. That reaction isn't confusion. It's emotional evasion. They're dodging the weight of their own behavior, not because they're unaware, but because they're afraid of what accountability would demand: humility, vulnerability, effort, and some people would rather lose you than lose control. This is the paradox of emotional immaturity. They want love, but not the responsibility that comes with it. They want connection, but not the growth it requires. They want closeness, but without being confronted. So they run. They ghost. They smile like nothing happened. And every time they do, they reinforce a story where they're the victim and you're the problem. That story helps them sleep at night, but it robs them of the chance to evolve. Now here's the Stoic truth. You cannot force someone to see what they're not ready to face. And it's not your duty to drag them toward growth. It's your duty to protect your energy and preserve your peace. You don't need their confession to validate your experience. You lived it. You felt it. That's enough. So the next time someone acts like your pain never happened, remember, they're not innocent. They're just scared. Scared that if they acknowledge the truth, the entire mask falls apart. Scared that you'll see who they really are behind the charm, the calm, the excuses, and most of all, scared that you'll walk away knowing the truth they refuse to face. And maybe that's exactly what you need to do. Chapter 3. You never win by reacting first. They hurt you. Then they act like you're the one being difficult. Because you felt something. Because you spoke up. Because you didn't just smile and let it slide. Now, suddenly, you're too sensitive. You're making a big deal. You're dramatic. But let's be clear, you didn't overreact. You responded. And there's a big difference. You responded to pain, to betrayal, to a moment where someone violated your boundaries, dismissed your voice, and expected you to just stay quiet. And when you didn't, they labeled you as the problem. That's not accountability. That's emotional manipulation. Here's how the game works. They break something, you feel it. You speak up. They minimize it. You question yourself. And just like that, the roles flip. Now you feel guilty. Now you feel unsure. Now you feel like you need to explain, justify, and apologize for having emotions. That's not conflict. That's control. And this is where most people fall into the trap. They react quickly, emotionally, desperately, trying to prove that what they felt was real, trying to convince someone who has no intention of listening. But the truth is, you never win by reacting first, because reaction gives them the leverage. It hands over your calm. It makes your emotions the focus, and not their behavior. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus taught, when someone provokes you, remember that it is not their action that disturbs you, but your judgment of it, and that you can revoke that judgment at any moment. In other words, you don't have to react just because someone wants you to. You don't have to raise your voice just because they went silent. You don't have to prove your pain just because they pretend not to see it. That's the trap. The more emotionally you react, the more they can twist the narrative. Let's make this real. Imagine this. You confront someone, maybe a partner, maybe a friend, and say, "What you said really hurt me." They pause and reply, "Wow, I can't believe you're still upset about that. I was just joking. You're so emotional." Now you're in defense mode. Now you're explaining, pleading, unraveling, and they're watching in silence. Not to understand, but to win. This isn't communication. It's a performance designed to wear you down. And if you're not careful, you'll start performing too, trying to get a reaction, trying to get clarity, trying to chase closure. But here's the truth. You don't owe a reaction to people who weaponize your emotions. What you owe is your peace. What you protect is your power. And that begins with stillness, silence, reflection, the pause between the trigger and your response. That's where your freedom lives. Remember this. People who manipulate want you reactive, because a reactive person is easier to blame, easier to confuse, easier to control. But a person who pauses, who steps back, who thinks instead of exploding, that person becomes unreadable, unshakable, untouchable. And when you become untouchable, they lose control. You don't need to scream. You don't need to convince. You don't need to crack just to be heard. Sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. So next time someone hurts you and then tries to flip the script, breathe, step back. Let the silence speak louder than the chaos, because you don't win by reacting first. You win by not letting their chaos become yours. And that, right there, is what separates the emotionally intelligent from the emotionally impulsive, the stoic from the broken, the healed from the still hiding. Chapter 4. Silence is a weapon. Use it wisely. There's a kind of silence that feels like surrender. And then there's the kind that feels like strategy. One is weak. The other is powerful beyond words, because silence, when used with clarity and intention, isn't a void. It's a mirror. And when you go quiet, truly quiet, around someone who's used to pulling strings with guilt and chaos, they panic. See, reactive people yell, but disciplined people observe. And when you stop reacting to manipulation, when you no longer explain, justify, or defend, you become unreadable. And nothing scares a manipulator more than someone they can't predict. They need your words to twist. They need your emotions to feed off. They need your confusion to maintain control. But when you give them silence, you starve their illusion. You take away the spotlight. You force them to sit in the stillness of what they did, without you performing for their comfort. Most people think silence is weakness, but that's because most people have never mastered it. They've only experienced the silence that comes from fear, not the silence that comes from wisdom. Because, let's be honest, Sometimes words won't work. Sometimes clarity won't fix it. Sometimes your voice falls on deaf ears. And when that happens, silence is your shield. The Stoics understood this intimately. Seneca wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." And I'd add, sometimes to remain silent is an act of power, because not every insult deserves a response. Not every accusation deserves a debate. Not every lie needs correcting. Why? Because Stoic silence is not about repression. It's about refusing to play a rigged game. Let's get real for a second. Maybe someone hurt you deeply. You tried to talk about it. They deflected. They gaslighted. They turned it into your fault. And eventually you stopped talking. But here's the difference. You didn't stop talking because you gave up. You stopped because you realized they weren't listening. That silence, that was your moment of awakening. And in that space you found something they never expected. Your center. There's something sacred about choosing silence over drama, about stepping back instead of stepping into chaos, about watching someone unravel not because you attacked them, but because you refused to participate. That's when silence becomes a weapon, a clean one, a precise one, a weapon that doesn't cut them, it disarms them. But here's the key. Silence alone is not enough. It must come from strength, not fear. It must be rooted in awareness, not avoidance. Because silence used to avoid your own truth is cowardice. But silence used to protect your peace, that's mastery. So how do you know when to speak and when to go silent? Ask yourself this. Will my words create clarity or chaos? Will they change anything, or will they just trigger more noise? Am I speaking from strength or from a need to be understood by someone who refuses to understand? If the answer points to chaos, then say nothing. Not because you're weak, but because you know your energy is sacred, and you're done wasting it on those who see your pain as an inconvenience. So the next time someone disrespects you, don't yell, don't chase, don't explain. Just fall silent. Let them wonder what's going on behind your stillness. Let them face their own reflection without your voice softening the blow. Because when used with wisdom, silence is not absence. It's presence in its purest form. You don't have to react to reclaim your power. Sometimes, you just have to stop talking and let your absence do the talking for you. Chapter 5. Ask. Don't attack the power of strategic questions. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is a question, not an accusation, not a confrontation. Just a clear, quiet, disarming question, delivered without emotion, but filled with intention, because people who manipulate expect you to react. They prepare for the explosion, the tears, the blame. But what they can't prepare for is calm curiosity. Instead of "Why did you lie to me?" try what made you feel that lying was your best option. Instead of "You clearly don't care." Ask, what do you think it says when someone causes pain and never acknowledges it? Instead of raising your voice, raise the standard of the conversation. Because when you ask the right question, you shift the dynamic. You remove the drama. You make the other person face their own logic and often their own lack of it. Strategic questions are surgical. They don't come from a wounded place. They come from a grounded one. You're not trying to wound back. You're trying to reveal the truth, even if they can't say it out loud. And more importantly, you're reminding yourself that you're not here to beg, chase, or collapse. You're here to understand. And if there's no understanding, you're here to walk away clearly, not chaotically. Here's what people often miss. You don't need to win an argument to gain clarity. You just need to observe how someone responds when truth knocks on their door. A strategic question puts them in the mirror, and if they flinch, deflect, dodge, or get defensive, you just got your answer. Not in what they said, but in what they couldn't say. Let's make it real. Say you've been ghosted after a fallout. Weeks later, they text you like nothing happened. You could lash out, you could ignore, or you could reply with calm steel. Hey, before we talk about anything else, I need to ask something. When things went quiet between us, did you ever stop and think how that might have felt on my end? That's not drama. That's emotional clarity. And the response will tell you everything. If they dodge it, they're still in hiding. If they get angry, they're still protecting the lie. If they answer honestly, they might just be ready to grow. But if they don't, now you know. You can leave with clarity, not confusion. The Stoics would call this applied wisdom. Seneca said, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." I say, the greatest test of character is how someone responds to truth that doesn't scream. When you ask without attacking, when you listen without needing to be right, you become unshakable, because you're not seeking revenge. You're seeking truth, and truth will either bring resolution or give you permission to release what no longer serves your peace. Here's the shift. You don't confront to change them. You confront to see them. And when someone shows you through silence, excuses, or blame that they're not ready for growth, you don't argue. You don't push. You note it. You thank the clarity, and you choose yourself. Ask. Don't attack. Because clarity without chaos is the mark of someone who's healed, and that's what you're aiming for. Not closure from them, but clarity within you. Chapter 6. Set boundaries with dignity. At some point, healing is no longer about understanding them. It's about protecting you, because you've explained enough. You've forgiven enough. You've waited long enough for someone to act like a decent human being. And now you realize that your peace is too expensive to be left unguarded. That's where boundaries come in, but not just any boundaries. Boundaries with dignity, not screamed, not weaponized, not fueled by bitterness, but clear and non-negotiable. Because when you're truly healing, you don't set boundaries to punish others. You set them to protect your clarity, your energy, your mental order. And here's the key. You don't need their agreement to enforce them. Let that sink in. You don't need to explain, convince, or debate. Boundaries aren't requests, they're declarations. You don't say, "Hey, I really hope you can stop doing this. It hurts me." You say, "When that happens again, I will walk away." Not as a threat, but as a fact. That's what Stoic discipline looks like. It's quiet, but it's final. Most people confuse boundaries with anger. They think if you're calm, you must be okay with everything. But calm doesn't mean access. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is, "I'm not available for that anymore. I'm no longer that version of me who tolerates this. I see what you're doing and I choose peace instead." And then you follow through. With action. With space. With stillness. Let's make this real. Say someone keeps minimizing your feelings. Every time you express discomfort, they turn it into a joke. Or worse, into an attack on your character. You've tried explaining, you've tried giving the benefit of the doubt, but nothing changes. Now you simply say, "I don't feel safe expressing myself around you, so I'm choosing to limit contact," and you follow through. Not because you're cold, but because you've grown, and growth requires you to protect your peace like it matters, because it does. The Stoics would call this self-governance. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, and boundaries are how you exercise that power in the real world. They're how you say, 'This is who I am now. This is what I allow. This is what I walk away from.' Not to control others, but to honor yourself. Here's the part no one tells you. You can love someone and still block access to you. You can forgive someone and still choose distance. You can wish them healing and still remove yourself from their reach. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. So if you're still waiting for permission to set that boundary, this is it. If you're still wondering whether it makes you a bad person, it doesn't. If you're scared, they'll call you cold, dramatic, selfish. Let them, because those who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always villainize the moment you set one. That's their discomfort, not your problem. Protecting your energy is not an act of war. It's an act of self-respect, and self-respect is never something you need to apologize for. So from now on, say it with dignity, "This is where I end." And you begin, "This is my line." And it doesn't move just because you don't like it. Say it, mean it, enforce it, and walk away without guilt. Because real peace begins where weak boundaries end. Chapter 7. Detach without guilt. Letting go isn't the hard part. It's the guilt that tries to follow you afterward. You set the boundary. You walked away. You stopped chasing the apology that was never coming. But now, your mind starts whispering, maybe you were too harsh. Maybe you should have given them one more chance. Maybe if you'd explained it better, they would have changed. That's not your truth talking. That's your conditioning. Because many of us were taught to equate love with sacrifice, with patience, with enduring more than we should, for longer than we should. So when we finally choose ourselves, we don't feel peace. We feel guilt. But here's the truth. You're not selfish for leaving something that was slowly destroying your spirit. You're not heartless for choosing clarity over confusion. You're not wrong for protecting the peace they kept violating. You're just free. And freedom feels uncomfortable at first, especially when you've been stuck in cycles that rewarded your silence. The Stoics knew that detachment isn't about being cold or distant. It's about perspective, about learning to hold space between your emotions and your identity. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control, and that includes people's opinions of your choices. You don't need their approval to let go. You don't need to convince anyone that the pain was real. You were there. You felt it. That's enough. Guilt is not a sign that you made the wrong decision. Sometimes it's just the echo of an old version of you, the version who needed to be liked, needed to be understood, needed to be the bigger person. But you've outgrown that version now. And with growth comes a new kind of silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of self-trust. Let's bring this into the real world. You've blocked someone who constantly crossed the line, and now mutual friends start asking questions. Was it really that bad? Couldn't you have talked it out? They weren't there when you cried yourself to sleep. They didn't hear the silence after your truth was ignored again and again. They weren't the ones waiting for a change that never came. So, no. You don't owe them a breakdown. You don't owe them your side of the story. You owe yourself peace and the space to protect it without having to defend it. Detachment isn't walking away in anger. It's walking away with understanding. Understanding that not everyone you love is meant to grow with you. That some connections expire when respect ends. And that closure, sometimes, isn't a conversation, it's a decision. Here's the part most people never tell you. You can forgive someone and still never speak to them again. You can release resentment and still maintain distance. You can love who they were and still accept who they are no longer deserves access to you. That's not bitterness. That's boundaries in motion. So the next time guilt creeps in, ask yourself, am I missing the person or the fantasy I created about who they could be? Do I regret walking away, or do I just miss the version of me who kept hoping they'd change? Because hope without evidence becomes self-betrayal. And you've betrayed yourself enough. From now on, choose peace, choose clarity, choose detachment that comes not from pain, but from power. Let go. Not because they deserve to be forgiven, but because you deserve to be free. Chapter 8. Not everyone deserves a response. There's a moment right after someone disrespects you, lies to you, or pretends like nothing ever happened where you feel this urge to speak, to defend, to explain. You want to say, "How could you? Don't you realize what you did? You can't just walk away from this." But pause. Breathe. Because here's the truth. Not everyone deserves a response. That's not bitterness. That's not pride. That's emotional intelligence. Because responding to someone who refuses to reflect is like arguing with a wall and expecting it to apologize. It drains your energy. It gives your power away. And worst of all, it keeps you stuck in their story. When what you really need is an exit. You're not obligated to answer the person who ghosted you and then pops up weeks later with a casual "hey." You're not required to dignify the manipulator who suddenly wants to check in after months of silence. You don't have to reply to someone who only reaches out when their guilt gets heavy and disappears again once they feel better. Silence is not weakness. It's clarity in motion. It says, "I see you. I understand exactly what you're doing. And I choose not to play." Stoicism teaches us to master what we can control and surrender what we can't. You can't control their awareness. You can't force their apology. You can't make them care in the way you wished they would. But you can control your energy, your attention, your peace. And every time you choose silence where noise was expected, you reclaim your power. Here's what most people get wrong. They believe silence is passive. that it means avoidance, that it means you're still hurt and don't know how to speak. But that's not the silence we're talking about. We're talking about intentional silence. The kind that says, I'm not ignoring you out of spite. I'm ignoring you out of self-respect. This conversation is a loop, and I'm no longer running in circles. That kind of silence, it's a full sentence. Let's take this into the real world. You spent months trying to make someone understand. You explained. You forgave. You waited. They said all the right things but never followed through. And now, they're back. Again. Saying they miss you. Wanting to talk. And maybe a part of you wants to reply. Maybe you want to show them how much you've grown. Maybe you want to tell them exactly what their silence did to you. But pause. What if the real strength is in not saying a word? Because the truth is they already know. They saw the damage, they watched you fall apart, and they still walked away. You're not silent because you have nothing to say. You're silent because they've already heard it and chose to ignore it. That's not your failure. That's their limit. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who wronged you." And sometimes, the most powerful way to rise above someone is not to engage at all. No explanation, no defense, no long messages proving how deeply they hurt you. Just stillness, presence, and a quiet knowing I don't belong in this dynamic anymore. Because let's be honest, every time you respond to someone who's shown you their pattern, you invite the pattern back in. You reopen wounds that were trying to close. You give energy to a cycle that thrives on reaction. But when you stop responding, the cycle ends. Not because they changed, but because you finally did. You owe it to yourself to walk away with grace. You owe it to your peace not to explain your healing to people who never valued your pain. So next time you feel that urge, that emotional reflex to respond, to clarify, to correct, ask yourself, what would responding actually give me? Would it bring peace or prolong pain? Am I responding for me or for the hope that they'll finally understand? And if the answer reveals a truth you've been avoiding, let that be enough. Let your silence say, I've said enough, I've given enough, I've done enough, and now I'm done. Not everyone deserves a response. Some people only deserve your distance. And in that distance, you'll find something no reaction ever gave you, peace that doesn't ask for permission. Chapter 9. You can't fix their mindset, only yours. Let's be honest, you tried. You were patient. You explained. Gently. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. Again, and again, and again. But nothing changed. Not because you didn't say it right. Not because you didn't care enough. But because you were trying to update someone else's mindset, instead of elevating your own. And that never works. You can't fix someone who doesn't think they're broken. You can't teach emotional maturity to someone who's addicted to avoidance. You can't lead someone toward healing when they're still committed to pretending they're not hurt, or worse, pretending they didn't hurt you. Trying to fix their mindset is like watering concrete. Nothing grows. And you lose your energy trying. Here's the hard truth most people avoid. You were trying to love someone into emotional growth. But growth doesn't come from your love. It comes from their choice. And if they're not ready to look inward, no amount of explaining, inspiring, or forgiving will make a difference. Because people don't grow when you carry their lessons for them. They grow when life makes them feel the weight of their choices. And that's something you can't deliver with words. Only silence and consequences can. The Stoics knew this deeply. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." And that's the key. Stop trying to talk someone into clarity. Start living with so much clarity that your life becomes the mirror. You don't need to tell them what they did. They know. You don't need to make them understand how they made you feel. They saw it in your eyes the moment they did it. The reason they won't change, not because they don't understand, but because they don't want to. Let's bring it into the real world. You're with someone who constantly invalidates your feelings. Every disagreement turns into blame. Every request becomes an attack. Every time you try to be honest, they shut down or explode. You start thinking, maybe I'm not saying it the right way. Maybe if I stay calm, they'll finally hear me. Maybe they just need more time. But the truth is, they've had plenty of time. What they lack is not time, it's willingness. And you can't download that into them. This is where you have to shift from external control to internal discipline. From trying to fix them to upgrading you. From over-functioning in the relationship to reclaiming your self-respect. Because the truth is, your mindset is the only one that matters in your healing. The more you try to change them, the more you abandon yourself. But the moment you shift that effort inward, that's when everything transforms. You stop trying to be understood and start becoming unshakable. You stop trying to prove your worth and start embodying it. You stop trying to change their reality and start designing your own. You'll know you've grown when you no longer need their breakthrough to have yours, when their lack of accountability no longer defines your next step, when you realize, it's not my job to carry your emotional evolution, it's my job to complete my own. That's what Stoic self-mastery looks like. You stop handing your peace to people who can't even manage their own emotions. You stop thinking, if they could just change, everything would be okay. And you start thinking, even if they never change, I will still rise. Because freedom doesn't come from fixing them, it comes from liberating yourself from the illusion that you have to. So if you're tired of explaining, defending, justifying, hoping, let that be your cue. Not to try harder, but to let go. Let go of the fantasy. Let go of the expectation. Let go of the idea that love means dragging someone into growth. Real love doesn't drag. It leads and leaves when it has to. You can't fix their mindset, but you can upgrade your own to the point where peace is your standard. And drama no longer gets a seat at your table. And once you do that, you stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. Chapter 10. Calm is power. Peace is control. They thought your silence meant weakness. They thought your calm meant indifference. They thought your peace meant you didn't care. But they were wrong. Because calm isn't the absence of emotion, it's the presence of discipline. And peace isn't passive, it's power. Not loud, not aggressive, not reactive. Just solid, unshakable, earned. You see, anyone can explode. Anyone can argue. Anyone can post, rant, scream, cry, beg, chase, prove. But to stay still, to breathe through the storm without letting it inside you, to know what someone did and still not let it hijack your mind. That's power. They hurt you. They disappeared. They acted like nothing happened. And yet, here you are, not because you didn't feel it, but because you refused to be ruled by it. That's what separates those who are free from those who are reactive. Not pain, but what they choose to do with it. The Stoics believed that the most dangerous person is not the loudest in the room. It's the one who doesn't need to speak to be in control. Because when you master your reactions, you master the battlefield. Not just outside, but within. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." That's the difference between being owned by emotion and owning your response. Let's make this real. You receive a message from someone who ghosted you, betrayed you. They're acting casual, as if you've just forgotten the emotional wreckage they left behind. The old you might have replied instantly, full of fire or confusion. The upgraded you take a breath. You evaluate, you observe, and then you choose. Sometimes you reply with calm. Sometimes you don't reply at all. Either way, you're in control now. And they feel it. They sense the shift. Because you're no longer performing. You're no longer dancing in their storm. You've built your own weather. This isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about deciding that your care no longer comes at the expense of your sanity. It's about refusing to hand your emotional regulation to people who haven't earned the right to touch it. Because peace is a skill, and calm is a choice. And both take incredible strength to maintain. You want revenge, you want closure, you want to show them what they lost. Here's how you do it. Stay calm when they expect chaos. Stay silent when they bait you to react. Stay focused when they want you distracted. Stay free when they hoped you'd be stuck. They may never say sorry. They may never admit the damage. They may go on pretending like they didn't cause it. But that's okay. You've outgrown the need for acknowledgement, because peace no longer depends on their awareness. It comes from your decision to rise, to breathe, to keep walking. And when they look back, what will haunt them the most is not your anger. It's your calm, that quiet, untouchable calm that says, "You no longer have access to me, not because I hate you, but because I finally love myself enough to protect my peace." Calm is power. Peace is control. And you, now, are both. You don't need revenge. You don't need an apology. You don't even need them to admit what they did, because the moment you stopped reacting, the moment you stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, that's the moment you became untouchable. They hurt you, and then they acted like nothing happened. But you turned the silence into strength. You turned the chaos into clarity. You turned the betrayal into a boundary. Not everyone grows. Not everyone heals. Not everyone chooses the path of self-awareness. But you do, and that's what makes you powerful. Not because you fought harder, but because you chose better. Better thoughts. Better peace. Better standards. You now understand the truth. You can't force someone to grow. You can't drag them into maturity. You can't save them from the mirror they refuse to look into. But you can walk away, you can rise, and you can build a life so calm, so grounded, so deeply protected that no lie, no silence, no manipulation ever gets in again. This is your power now. Unshakable, stoic, clear, and yours alone. If this message spoke to you, leave a comment below. Tell us what part of this video hit you hardest. What truth are you finally ready to walk away with? If you found clarity here, share this with someone who needs it. And if you're ready for more, subscribe to Think Stoic 101, because we're just getting started. And your next level demands your full attention. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You just need to be sure of who you are and silent about what you're no longer available for. We'll see you in the next video.